It is hardly a secret that ships, even massive metal beasts, can be brought down by Mother Nature. The Titanic is, of course, the classic example. However, as Admiral Halsey could tell you, even steel warships can be sunk by nature, especially when high winds and high waves are involved. Before Halsey steered into two typhoons in the Pacific, however, another incident happened in the Atlantic, decades earlier during the First World War. In 1916, an American armored cruiser, one of the largest of the type, succumbed to the force of nature. That ship was USS Memphis, formerly USS Tennessee, before that name was given to a far more famous battleship. Memphis was driven aground on the rocks of Santo Domingo. At the time, it was believed a tsunami had done the deed. There were no reported winds, and a massive wave was the driving force behind the sinking. But was it really a tsunami that did this ship in? In this video, I'll go over the sinking of USS Memphis, and the two competing theories on her sinking. First, a bit of background. USS Memphis was only in Santo Domingo because of peacekeeping duties. The Dominican Republic was a bit of a mess at the time, and the cruiser was dispatched to keep an eye on things. Memphis, under the command of Captain Edward Beach Sr., arrived on July 23rd of 1916. The ship would never leave. On the afternoon of August 29th, 1916, the cruiser began to roll at her berth, and it was severe enough to cause real concern for Captain Beach and the other officers aboard the ship. Now, it's worth noting here that the captain was aware of potential issues. It was hurricane season, and the ship was moored in shallow water, 55 feet or 17 meters. As a result, Memphis had two boilers lit to provide power for auxiliary machinery. Captain Beach had wanted to keep 4 of the 16 aboard lit in case the ship needed to get moving in a hurry. But, well, penny pinching comes in. He was ordered by his direct superior, Admiral Charles Pond, to only keep 2 boilers going. The Navy was very serious about economics and cost-cutting. Personally, I find it hard to believe that keeping 4 boilers running instead of 2 was that much more expensive, although this is what apparently happened. In any event, with 2 boilers hot and 4 more ready to start if necessary, Memphis sat in place. A previous hurricane scare on August 22nd had demonstrated the ship could get moving in 40 minutes. That was how much time it took to get the steam pressure from 6 boilers. Now, with the background established, let's return to August 29th, 1916. The rolling began about 12 p.m. that day. It was concerning enough to warrant attention, but not to set sail. Captain Beach was keeping an eye on things, but according to survivor testimony, a recreation party was still sent ashore at 1 p.m. However, by 3 in the afternoon, things had changed. Beach noted that the swell was increasing, along with long-period waves coming in. Now convinced that his ship would be better off at sea, the captain ordered steam pressure brought up. This was probably too late to do much good, unfortunately. By 3:30, the waves were high enough that they were spraying water through ventilators on the cruiser's deck. These hadn't been secured properly, and it let water into the engine rooms. Men went out on deck to shut those off, but the damage was done. It slowed down the process of getting the boilers going. Although, considering it would have taken at least 40 minutes to do so, it might not have mattered in the end. In any case, there would be enough steam for the engines by 4:35 p.m. During this process, according to a report by Lieutenant Commander Thomas Withers, a boat was sent ashore. A motorboat heading to pick up the recreation party that had been sent out earlier in the afternoon. This boat was about 500 yards from Memphis at 3:45. The result is probably predictable. Soon after 3:45, the first swell hit. This didn't do much to either Memphis or her boat. Then a second swell hit at 4:05 p.m. This swell threw the motorboat end over end, according to the report. There were 38 men in that boat. Only 6 survived, according to Withers' report, although another source notes 25 deaths as a result of the boat wreck, which doesn't match his numbers. Either way, the waves only got worse at this point. Officers on the bridge reported that Memphis was bumping the bottom from the force of the waves. The ship was anchored in 55 feet of water, as said before. That means the waves were something like 40 feet high, even at that point. Further evidence of this comes from the plight of USS Castine, an antique gunboat that was also moored nearby. Withers' report notes that Castine, masts and all, repeatedly vanished from sight, even from the bridge of Memphis, 45 feet above the surface. Nonetheless, that gunboat was the lucky one. She was able to sail astern of Memphis, using the bulky armored cruiser as a breakwater. The gunboat labored out to sea and would survive the day. Her crew even made a failed attempt to rescue the survivors from the swamped motorboat. Memphis would not prove so fortunate. When the first waves began to strike at 3:45, a massive wave was spotted in the distance. This wave was estimated to be about 70 to 80 feet high, although it was also reported to be 100 feet in height. That turned out to be wrong. It was more like 3 waves of about 70 feet each. Those waves took about an hour to arrive. During that intervening time, smaller waves continued to slam into the side of the cruiser. These waves battered Memphis into the bottom, as mentioned earlier. They pushed the ship towards the rocky shoreline as well. It reached the point that Captain Beach ordered a second anchor dropped to try and stabilize his ship. As it turned out, right after that order went out, the engine room reported they would have steam up in 5 minutes. The anchor was cancelled, although with the rolling and wave action, it didn't really matter. The anchor wouldn't have been safe to drop in any case. Moreover, the waves pushing Memphis over allowed for more water to enter the engine rooms. At points, water was even entering the ship through the funnels, 70 feet above the surface. This, combined with the ship slamming into the bottom and damaging her props, was enough to keep her in place. By 4:38, the steam pressure was no more than 90 pounds. Not even enough to turn into the wave, let alone get to sea. Beach tried anyway, but it was too late. At 4:40, the massive waves finally arrived. It took an hour, but that hardly mattered. The crewmen estimated it at 70 feet when it impacted. Certainly it swamped the cruiser up to her funnels. Only her masts, the highest point on the ship, remained above the wave. The sudden influx of cold water caused boiler explosions, killing and wounding men in the boiler rooms. 2 men on deck, struggling to release the second anchor, were washed overboard. Others were killed and wounded all across the stricken cruiser. Remarkably, Memphis wasn't capsized by this impact. The ship was struck in quick succession by 3 massive waves, but she didn't capsize, and the anchor that was in the water remained attached to the ship. That said, the cruiser was slammed into the bottom. The area below the waterline began to take severe damage, and this would only get worse. Within a few minutes, Memphis was driven into the rocks ashore. Further waves continued to pound the cruiser's side, driving her even further into the rocks. Her port side was absolutely wrecked during this process. And by 5 p.m., USS Memphis was hard aground. The water was only around 12 to 20 feet deep, and waves continued to damage the cruiser. Even at this point, it was apparent she was a lost cause. Nonetheless, the crew continued to fight to save their ship, including throwing lines ashore where Marines and local Dominicans arrived to secure the ship. If she was going to run aground, better that than being driven off the rocks, and sinking in deep water where the crew couldn't be rescued. On that topic, with the ship secured, the crew, beginning with the injured, were evacuated ashore. Throughout this entire process, from when the first wave hit to the ship being abandoned, Memphis lost 43 of her crew. A further 204 were injured. The ship, once abandoned, looked mostly fine above the waterline. However, beneath the surface, the cruiser was a mess. Her hull was driven in, and her boilers were ruined. In fact, the entire power plant was a write-off. When the waves subsided, Memphis was closely examined. It was recognized that, even if the ship was towed to dock, it would be a waste of effort. It would take years to effect repairs, and those repairs would have cost the same as the ship herself. for a type that was already obsolete, even at the time. As a result, Memphis's guns and other important equipment were pulled off, and the ship was left in place, only being properly scrapped in the late 1920s. Now, with all of this out of the way, what actually wrecked USS Memphis? Well, the Navy attributed it to a tsunami. However, there were no major seismic incidents in the area, at least none that were recorded. A tsunami is going to be generated by either an earthquake or a massive landslide, the latter generally caused by an earthquake. The tsunami argument came about because of the lack of heavy wind. It didn't seem like storm-driven waves at the time. On the other hand, a hurricane passed south of Hispaniola on August 29th. This hurricane was in the right place at the right time to create the kind of swells that hit Memphis. There's a much more detailed breakdown on this linked in the description. For the purposes of this video, however, it seems to match much better than any tsunami source. Obviously, of course, there's no way to know for sure. Arguments can and will be made in either direction. It could be there was some unidentified seismic event that generated a tsunami. It could be the hurricane driving waves north. Regardless, the author of the hurricane argument puts it best. If Memphis had been anchored further out, in water over 100 feet deep, she might have ridden out the swells. Being moored so close to shore ultimately doomed the cruiser. Thank you for watching. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy the content, and I'll see you in the next one.